Hello and welcome to May's Backblaze webinar. Today, I'm going to be talking with James Ross of Nodecraft about how he moved his global game server platform to Backblaze B2 and made huge savings on his cloud spend. So a bit of housekeeping before we get started. We are recording this webinar, so if you do have to drop off for any reason, we'll mail you a link to that recording. Please ask questions throughout the webinar. There's the questions tab, I believe it's on the right. And what we'll do is we will queue up those questions and answer them all at the end. So as soon as a question comes into your head, type it in and then we'll get to it later on. And don't forget the attachments. So any resources that we mention along the way, the links will be in the attachments area. So I am Pat Patterson. I'm the Chief Technical Evangelist at Backblaze. So I've been at Backblaze for about 18 months now, but my background is in developer evangelism. So I've held that role through Sun Microsystems, Salesforce, StreamSets, Citrix, and Backblaze. About 20 years in this business. And so my co-speaker today, I'd love to welcome James Ross. James, tell us about yourself and what you do at Nodecraft.
Hey everyone, yes, as Pat said, I'm James Ross. I'm the Chief Technical Officer here at Nodecraft, and I have been with Nodecraft since day one, which was back in 2013. So we're getting up to just over 10 years now. It's been a very fun ride, and we very much offer game server hosting, and it's kind of our bread and butter. And for the last 10 years, we've been very much kind of just developing that and just kind of offering people the best experience that we can, just kind of get online and play with their friends and family.
Awesome. And now I have to ask, James, and I will reciprocate, where does Cherry Jimbo come from?
So Cherry Jimbo is a long story, but the short version is effectively as a young kid, I was joining a clan of people that were playing online games, and they had to all choose a color. And all of the awesome colors were chosen. So your blues, your red, your oranges, all of the common ones. So I thought I would be really clever and choose kind of a weird color called cherry. And I was maybe 13, 14 at the time, and it's kind of just stuck forever. And Jimbo is kind of just a name that I used to use on Xbox Live kind of things. I used to be Jimbo Dude back in the day on those.
Right. So
Cherry Jimbo has just become a combination of those two. And it's really lucky because it's generally just available on every platform because it's such an odd name. So
yeah, I have the same with Metadaddy. So my story is back in about 2002, I needed an AIM handle. So for James and the rest of the kids out there, AIM is AOL Instant Messenger. I think it was finally turned off a few years ago. And I was product manager at that time for a product called MetaDirectory, kind of like a LDAP synchronization tool. And we just had our first child. And so I put the two together, so Metadaddy instead of MetaDirectory. And like Cherry Jimbo, it's almost universally available whenever a new platform pops up. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, we'll give you a brief introduction to Backblaze and Nodecraft. And then James is going to take us through the story, really, about how Nodecraft implemented a brand new management platform interface, NodePanel 2, and how that expansion led to some pain in the form of the cost they were paying for storing data on Amazon S3. And then we'll go through how Cloudflare and the Bandwidth Alliance introduced James to Backblaze B2 and how he migrated the entire platform from Amazon S3 to Backblaze B2 and the savings they realized, and kind of finish up with where Nodecraft are today, and just a quick wrap up at the end. So with that, let's dive in. So Backblaze B2 cloud storage. The best way of summing this up is Amazon S3 compatible cloud object storage at about 1/5 of the cost of Amazon S3. So for a lot of customers these days, that S3 compatibility is absolutely key because it means that any applications, tools, whether they're off the shelf or custom built, it's very straightforward to point those over at Backblaze B2 by just changing the endpoint URL. Now, interestingly, James, Nodecraft is now a pretty long time customer, I think over 4 years of Backblaze. And when you got started, James, there was no S3 compatible API, right?
Yeah, correct. At the time, there wasn't. So very much we had to kind of put our own implementation around the original Backblaze API, but it very much made sense for us to do at the time. And now it's just obviously way more easy than it was back then. So that's even better for everyone.
Right. So it was these other attributes that made a difference for Nodecraft. The simplicity of being able to just sign up and get started with, 10 gigabytes free without even a credit card. The fact that, we're a reliable storage platform. And I think, the key factor in this story was that affordability. We come in about 1/5 of the cost of the hyperscalers, including Amazon S3. And you can choose now from pay-as-you-go or capacity-based pricing. And I'll talk a little bit more about the difference of that in that later on. So, James, Nodecraft.
Yeah, so Nodecraft, as I mentioned a little bit before earlier, is a online game server hosting platform, and we allow people to effectively play any game that we support online with their friends on any platform as easy as possible. And for a lot of people, that's kind of what makes the gaming experience theirs and what makes it kind of fun. If you have a Minecraft world you can kind of play on for 3-4 years, that is what actually makes gaming online with people fun. And we find people very much kind of come and go, as gamers do. Gamers don't really spend a lot of time playing like a single game. So kind of very much over time, we had to kind of think about how gamers are playing different games and how they're kind of jumping between these different games and kind of designing our platform to better support that. So today we're looking at a global fleet of over 300,000 game servers, a global user base that is in the hundreds of thousands. And we currently have game servers in 12 countries across various continents all over the world, which is very, very important for gamers as well. Gamers very much value latency. So if you're a gamer in Australia, for example, trying to play on a game server that's hosted in somewhere in Europe is going to be significantly slower than just connected to a game server in Australia. So that is our goal, just to make gaming online for everyone as easy as possible and for people to have those experiences affordably and in a way that they can just carry on having fun with their friends and not have to worry about any of the technical parts around actually hosting those game servers.
And for folks viewing that might be outside that gaming community, why run your own server rather than just, congregate on some, the vendor's gaming platform? What makes the difference in, say, running your own Minecraft world?
That's a fantastic question. And the primary thing about having your own game server is control. So if you are connecting to some other person's server or some generic online game platform out there, there is almost zero control of kind of how the game works, the rules of the world. Maybe you want people to be able to fly in your world, or perhaps you want them to be able to have an infinite number of blocks or things like that, and be able to control, as well as for a lot of gaming groups and friends, they kind of want that individual place where their friends can kind of all join. So very much on our platform, you can allow lists of people that can join. So you can only have your friends or your family join, which is also very popular with parents for creating these like spaces where their kids can and they can very much know who is joining that service. They haven't got to worry about the internet, which can be a scary place sometimes. So, yeah.
So a parent can manage the players that are allowed to join a game very closely while allowing their child to have like free reign within that game with their friends.
Exactly, and that's a hugely powerful feature for us, I think.
Absolutely. the early days of Nodecraft before Node Panel 2, how were things back in 2017 and before?
Yeah, so very much in the early days of Nodecraft, we were kind of working out our market and trying to figure out exactly how things were going to work. So from day one, we kind of opened the gates with just one game, which was Minecraft at the time. It was a hugely popular game. It still is today. And it was a great way for us to kind of experiment with how the kind of space works, how online gaming kind of works, and very much how people kind of interact with game servers and people online. But we quickly kind of found the just offering Minecraft was not a great idea for us. It kind of prevented us from scaling up rapidly. It prevented us from kind of offering new features to our platform. So we kind of, at the time, we were running a kind of iteration of Node Panel, which was kind of just interfacing with off-the-shelf components and things like that. But with Node Panel 2, which was kind of in development for a year or two, we very much wanted to create this new platform effectively from the ground up. And this effectively replaced every single part of our stack. And it was a massive deal for us. We went from one game to supporting 12 games. We introduced the concept of instances and save states, which allowed people to effectively jump from Minecraft to Terraria to Counter-Strike, whatever other games they were playing that weekend. They could kind of save their games, save the state of their game, jump between another game, and then a few hours, few days, or even months or years later, they could come back, take that save state, and effectively start up from where they left, which is, again, hugely powerful for games like Minecraft. It's very common that you're working on these large kind of build projects, and you want to kind of take them, but that day you might get bored and you might want to go play something else for a few hours. And very much offering gamers the ability to save and swap between those games was a hugely popular feature, as well as offering the ability to just constantly back up their game servers. So very much we use that exact same system to create at least once weekly backups for every single customer, which means there are constant like world files being saved, game settings, player stats, everything that you need about your game server to come back to it in a year from now is saved. And obviously, that meant having a huge amount of storage for that kind of information. Game servers, especially larger games, can be in the tens or even hundreds of gigs, which meant we had to have some kind of reliable cloud storage for storing and downloading and kind of accessing those very regularly. It's very common for a lot of storage to be there. People would kind of download them maybe once a day, maybe once a week, maybe even once a year. But we had to have that reliable kind of storage. And for us at the time, that was Amazon S3. And we use Amazon S3 because it was kind of the industry standard. It was very kind of well known, and it was very known to be reliable. So that was kind of what we opted to do. And it was working really well. It was going over the Cloudflare CDN, which we were using at the time for kind of a lot of our websites. We were very early adopters of Cloudflare, and so it just kind of made sense to stick with that kind of what we knew for using as a CDN. And we were doing a lot of storage in S3, and over time we started seeing a lot of kind of storage and cost start to build in Amazon S3.
So before we move on, just a quick aside for folks that aren't familiar with this CDN term. It's a content distribution network. And what this does is Cloudflare have nodes all around the world, and those nodes cache data. So when you as an end user retrieve data from, say, a web server, in the simplest case, those images and movies and so on are often cached at a provider like Cloudflare. So then they reduces latency because that node is much closer to you than the ultimate origin of the files. Okay, so you're in Amazon S3, and it's not exactly a happy picture.
Unfortunately not. So it's one of those things that we started with, and in the short term, it was fine. But then the platform started to grow, and we started to get a lot more users, a lot more games, a lot larger games. And all of a sudden, we started seeing our egress bills, especially, as well as our storage bills, just rapidly escalating. And
hang on, what's egress?
So egress in this case is data transfer. So effectively, when you grab a file from a provider like S3 and it goes over the public internet, you're paying for how much data is transferred over the public internet until the end user can actually then download it.
Right.
And that was a big thing with Amazon S3 because they charge a lot of money for egress.
Right.
And especially when you're dealing with files that are constantly being downloaded, those egress fees escalate. And for us, that was rapidly becoming very uneconomical because we were effectively having these files that were going constantly over the public internet, which resulted in a lot of expensive bandwidth. They were going effectively over from S3 to the public internet through Cloudflare. So we were creating these chains of networks, and we were just getting effectively destroyed with egress fees all the way through. And the egress was by far the most expensive part. The storage is generally one of those things that is relatively cheap in comparison. But once you start having these 100 gigabyte files that are being downloaded and you're paying for the egress, it gets rapidly expensive.
So, and just out of curiosity, did you start out with the kind of startup credits from Amazon? Did you get that first taste free?
Yeah, we did. And that was a very nice thing to have, but you very quickly eat through those over just a couple of months if you're doing any kind of large scale application. So it was very nice to kind of experiment, and we used that in the early days as we were testing primarily, but they don't really last very long. So,
and as a growing company, you see your cloud costs grow as basically as a function of your success.
Exactly, and it was growing at a rate that we just couldn't quite stomach, unfortunately.
Right. So you heard about this Bandwidth Alliance. Tell us a little bit about how you discovered this this phenomenon.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we were kind of very early adopters of Cloudflare as well, and kind of very much watching their blog. And we saw it was around kind of 2018, I think around September or so. They announced this thing called the Bandwidth Alliance, which sounded really, really cool. They were kind of talking about how there's a lot of times where they work with providers and they aren't paying for the bandwidth between them because they're doing things like peering directly and things like that. But still, these providers are passing on these massive costs to their end users. A primary example, again, being Amazon S3. And Cloudflare originally partnered with a few companies. There was on the list Backblaze, and we saw that, and kind of the cogs started going off in our brain, like, this is interesting. And they offered this thing called B2 Cloud Storage, which looked very, very similar to S3's offering, but was powered behind this Bandwidth Alliance. And that was really, really exciting to us because it meant that any bandwidth that we could transfer between Backblaze and Cloudflare would effectively be free, which would remove a huge portion of those costs which we were seeing with Amazon S3, where the egress was actually destroying us. If we were just paying for that storage, that was a much more kind of viable cost for our business needs and our business scale as we were kind of scaling up rapidly. So that was very, very exciting to us. And that was around the time that we started very heavily looking at Backblaze.
So really that it was that transfer cost that was the big deciding factor, and the fact that the storage cost was, about 1/5 of S3 was just icing on the cake.
Exactly. Yeah. It was primarily those egress fees, and the storage being cheaper was, as you said, just icing on the cake. But for us, the huge selling point was that egress being free and not having to worry about that suddenly escalating like overnight from $0 to X numbers of dollars.
Right. Yeah. Because I guess that's a very variable cost that's difficult to predict.
Exactly. With storage, it's very predictable. It's very calculatable. With egress, it's less calculatable. If someone decides to download a file 5,000 times, you can't necessarily predict that. So
right. Yeah, you're not always in control of what your users are doing. Right.
Exactly.
So you bit the bullet, right?
We did. So it was around late 2018. I believe it was around November. We were kind of looking at this, and it became a problem that we really couldn't ignore anymore. And we had to kind of make a change to actually allow our business to keep scaling up and keep kind of working on the margins that we were wanting to hit. So we were looking at B2, and we spent quite a lot of time kind of experimenting and playing with it. And we had to effectively do a complete refactor of how our backup code worked. Because at the time, we were using S3, and there are tons of kind of S3 tooling out there. It's very industry standard. But at the time, Backblaze wasn't supporting the S3 compatible APIs, which is unfortunate. But for us, it wasn't, as is very apparent, it wasn't a deal breaker. And it still made a huge amount of sense for us to kind of spend this time refactoring our code and spend this time kind of re-architecting how we were designing how our system worked to actually handle these backups.
Right.
Because of all those cost savings.
And of course, for anybody looking at this now in 2023, that's an exercise they don't even have to worry about. You were out there, I guess, about 18 months before that S3 compatible API arrived. So you refactored the code, you'd done some evaluation, some tests, and then one day in December 2018, you flipped the switch.
We did, very much. So we had to design a system that could transfer this data in a way that was fast, but very much more importantly, in a way that was transparent to our customers, so that there was no impact to our customers and everything just carried on working. So we had to design a system that would effectively use all of this kind of infrastructure that we had previously built up, because the goal was to complete this in less than 24 hours, because we very much wanted to be out there, out of S3 as quickly as possible and to reduce our costs as fast as possible. So we very much designed this system that would previously use some kind of infrastructure that we had in place using Docker Swarm, which, if you're not familiar, is a way to kind of orchestrate containers around the world with various different nodes and various different kind of machines in a way that kind of lets you scale up and scale down very, very rapidly and very, very quickly. So we very much designed this system that would effectively take a existing backup from S3. It would kind of lock the backup, download the backup, confirm the integrity of the backup, upload the backup to Backblaze, and then report that it was done and start over again. And we designed this to be effectively a one-in, one-out situation per process thread, which made sense for obviously doing it single-threaded and for reliability. But then, because we had this kind of Swarm infrastructure that we previously built up, we could rapidly scale that across hundreds of machines. And we could effectively have all of these machines grabbing these backups in parallel and doing everything all at once. And at the time, we had 23 terabytes or so of backups in S3, which we wanted to get moved over to B2. And we rapidly killed our goal of 24 hours and did it in 7 hours.
Well, that's less than a third of. It's barely even a working day.
Exactly. It was pretty much barely even a working day. One of the really kind of interesting parts while working through this is at the start, we were doing things significantly faster than was actually working. So we started this off using numbers that were a little too optimistic, and we started seeing reports of customers having latency issues and people experiencing kind of connectivity problems. And it turns out we had kind of started almost dosing ourselves a little bit, which obviously was not the intent. So at that point, we kind of just scaled things back a little bit. So I imagine if we hadn't scaled back, we could have probably done it a little bit quicker, but this was the much safer way of doing things. And it kind of very much let our customers see it transparently. And 7 hours later, we were done. And I believe it was completely successful. I believe there was less than 2 things that failed, and that was primarily just because the data wasn't even in S3. It was like a 0-byte file in S3 somehow. Wow. There was just those kind of edge cases that you come across. Right. But it was wildly successful, and we were out of there in 7 hours. So that was fantastic.
So I guess the critical thing there was that you were running these worker nodes in the same infrastructure as your game platform. So the data, this massive amount of data was flowing from S3 into your games platform and then out to B2. Whereas if you had kind of said, okay, well, we'll just spin up something somewhere else. Hindsight is always 20/20 vision, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things that we kind of wanted to reuse the existing infrastructure for cost reasons, but also if we had spun up some instances somewhere else, we could have probably reduced the impact, etc., etc. But all we had to do was very much tune it down. Customers were happy, we were happy, and it was a great day. So
awesome, good. Always, it's great when a plan comes together.
Yes, it is.
So, and then another little aside. I mean, pioneers get the arrows in their backs. We now have a feature at Backblaze that we introduced last year called Universal Data Migration. So the idea here is that if you have large amounts of data either in another cloud, such as Amazon S3, could be on premises, you might have a closet full of disk drives. We often see that with our media and entertainment customers, or even on tape. We will actually move that data into Backblaze B2 free of charge. So, and it's us doing it. We're not just giving you the ability to do it yourself. Our team is very experienced at this data movement, and we have partners that allow us to pull your data out of, for example, S3 cheaper than you can, because they have direct connections into AWS. There's a little bit of fine print. I've put it at the bottom. We don't tend to put the fine print too fine. So we cover those fees. If you're on pay-as-you-go, you're looking at using 50 terabytes or more, but all sizes of B2 Reserve bundles. And B2 Reserve is where, rather than paying as you go, so having a month-to-month storage bill that is variable, you say, I want 100 terabytes, and you pay an annual contract. Is capacity-based pricing. So all sizes of B2 Reserve bundles, starting at, I think, 10 or 20 terabytes, you get universal data migration. And the last kind of term and condition really is that you have to keep it with us for a year. So you commit to keeping your data with us for a year, and given the cost differential, that's not a hard decision for most customers. So that little commercial break out of the way, what was the result of this migration?
The result was fantastic. We were very, very happy. And the big exciting number is that we saved 85% on our storage and egress costs, which at the time and very much today still is very, very exciting for us. It allows us to kind of reallocate those funds to more parts of the business, to kind of scale in other places. It allowed us to hire more folks on, to rapidly kind of build our team and grow out the other games and things like that that we support. And very much today, we are still 100% using the Bandwidth Alliance and with Backblaze B2 for these ridiculous and fantastic savings.
Amazing. And what I guess Nodecraft would have been a completely different company today if you just soldiered on with Amazon S3.
Very much. It's not a thought I like to think about too much. But I don't imagine we would be in the same spot we are now if we have had to stomach those fees forever.
Okay, so today we've got some numbers here. Talk us through this. You're using two compute providers, right?
That's correct. So very much today, we are using two primary hardware and network providers, which we partner directly with, Service.com and DataPacket. They are great working partners of ours, and they provide us hardware and network in various regions around the world. They kind of operate in differing regions, which is why we use both of them at the same time, as well as for a lot of redundancy and reliability. And we are using those for all of our kind of infrastructure for hosting those game servers. And with that, kind of very much on the day-to-day, we see anywhere from around 6 terabytes a day of these instance backups being pushed up to Backblaze. And that can vary from people that are actually saving and swapping their game to a different game server, or it can be people that are just backing up their game because they're changing something and they want a backup which they can restore to later, or even just part of our kind of automated platform that creates these constant backups for everyone, just in case of any ridiculous errors.
Right.
And today we have about in Backblaze V2 around at least 600 terabytes or so.
It's not around 600 terabytes. I went and checked. It is 600 terabytes.
It's an unbelievable number compared to where we were just a few years ago.
30, yeah, over 30, no, nearly 30 times as much in 4 years. Wow.
Yeah, that's a pretty crazy number.
Who wouldn't want their business to grow like that?
And that's really exciting for us. And we are storing that very happily in Backblaze today. And on average, there's about half a terabyte or so a day that is actually transferred for people that are actually accessing those. That could be kind of downloading them or, again, saving and swapping to those. A lot of the time, very much we see people that will kind of save a game and they may disappear for a few months and then come back a few months later. Just kind of the way that gamers work is very kind of seasonal in nature. So that's very something that we are familiar with and kind of expect on our platform.
And that's something we see, at Backblaze, that backup traffic is, an order of magnitude or more greater than restore traffic for obvious reasons. It would be a sad state if you needed to restore as often as you backed up. So we'll wrap up. And really from the Backblaze point of view, there are 3 key points here to remember. Our cloud object storage comes in at about 1/5 of the cost of Amazon S3. And that's really, we say around 1/5 the cost because it's very variable depending on the amount of egress. For Nodecraft, that switch to Backblaze B2 actually, saved them more than 80%. It was like 85%. This zero cost egress is also absolutely key. For Nodecraft, the nature of their business meant that they were moving gigabytes of data at a time between their storage platform and their compute servers. So this Bandwidth Alliance, this partnership between Backblaze and Cloudflare, gave them that zero cost egress. And we also have partnerships with other CDN providers. So Fastly, Bunny.net, and Cashfly. And we also have zero cost egress to our compute partners. So right now that's Vultr and Equinix Metal. So if you're running your compute workload there, you'll get zero cost data transfers from Backblaze B2 to your compute nodes. And then finally, James and his team did an amazing job moving that data across. 23 terabytes in under 7 hours is quite remarkable. But customers coming to us now don't even have to worry about that. We will actually do that job for you at no cost to you. We only ask that you stay with us for a year afterwards. Okay, so James, Nodecraft, this is your chance to get your plugin for Nodecraft. How many games are there now?
So currently we support hosting 30 games, and we're kind of in this transition phase at the moment where we are working on this new platform for NodePanel 3, which is effectively going to be a kind of new part of our business where we are partnering directly with game studios and game developers to kind of embed this kind of technology and product directly into games themselves. We've got a few kind of trials that are happening right now, but I would very much encourage, if you are a game studio or a game developer who wants to kind of integrate this kind of technology or kind of the ability for your own players to host their own game servers directly into your game, please do reach out to me. Otherwise, very much if anyone just wants to kind of create their own game server for one of the games we support, just head over to our website, which is nodecraft.com, and it's very, very easy to just get up and started in just a few minutes.
So as well as Minecraft, you mentioned earlier on, Minecraft, Terraria, and what else? What are the other kind of headline games that are popular on Nodecraft now?
Some of the most popular ones today are games like Minecraft, Ark, Terraria, Rust. Valheim was a big one just last year. There's a lot of kind of the old favorites, the Counter-Strikes of the world, the Team Fortresses of the world. There's a very, very long list of them these days, and it's still constantly growing. So if there's one that we don't support and you'd like to see, just hit us up, let us know, and I'm certain that at some point we can get it added to the platform.
When you have like 30 games you support, adding the 31st is not that big a deal.
Exactly.
All right. And so, yes, you can go to nodecraft.com, and for more information on Backblaze B2, you can go to backblaze.com/B2, or nobody types URLs in anymore, just Google Backblaze B2. So with that, I would like to thank you very much, James. You've been an awesome guest. I've learned, I knew all about this deployment already. I thought I did, but I've learned quite a lot in the past 40 minutes or so. And thank you for your attention, everybody out there. And we will move to questions.